Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer, healthier, and more engaged lives, not only for ourselves and our couples, but also for companies and countries. I'm Aviva Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I talk with Deirdre Wafer, the head of LinkedIn's employee resource group for the 40 plus, called the Wisdom ERG. She shares with us why the company launched this group, what she's learned running it about what Q3ers want, and some advice for other companies thinking of how to generate intergenerational collaboration and communication. As she says, we are surprisingly age siloed, and it takes work and intentionality to talk across decades. Here's how. So welcome, Deirdre Wafer, to Four Quarter Lives. Delighted to have you with us.
Delighted to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
So I wanted to start, very interesting that LinkedIn has a Wisdom employee resource group, and I really wanted to start with what were a little bit the origins and reasons behind its creation, and how has it evolved in the years since?
It was started about 4 years ago, and it really reflects the acknowledgement of the needs of a multi-generational workforce. It's about bringing workers together who are over the age of 40, allies right across LinkedIn.
And I love that age. I mean, I love the fact that in a tech company, what most companies would consider sort of their older employee would usually go to 50 or 55. But here at LinkedIn, we're talking 40 plus. I think that's very significant.
We are talking 40 plus, but we're also talking about allies, people who are younger than that. And so If I think about the 40 plus, we have people who are in their 40s, in their 50s, and in their 60s. And we have people in their 20s and 30s who are also allies of wisdom, because everybody is going to be a day older tomorrow. And this is about your future self. What do you want your workplace to be? And that's why it's so important to be part of this conversation. And so for me, I was one of a group of people involved in the setup of the ERG in LinkedIn. And I actually led the regional team in EMEA for the first 2 years and then took on this global role. I'm delighted to have that opportunity to do so. It's also worth thinking about, you asked, how has it evolved over time? So I think the first piece is, we are one of 12 different ERG groups. There's a lot, but I suppose on the other hand, we have lots of multiple identities.
Right.
So age is a unifying identity. Everybody is going to be older, but today, obviously, I'm female and, I also am a carer for part of my life as well. And I'm part of the Wisdom community. So for me, I think it's really, really important that we have the chance to have those intersectional conversations, because age is a unifying piece. But I think also we need to think about how do we make that a thriving community. And one of the things when we started off, it was literally making people aware of the importance of the age identity, because nobody thought about it. And I think it's also true that in certain cultures, we cover our age. We don't admit we are that. And so, enabling that conversation to happen, enabling me be happy that I'm in my 20s or I'm in my 50s or I'm in my 60s, whatever it is.
Putting it on the table and normalizing the conversation.
Normalizing the conversation was a lot of what the starting point was, that you can have this conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the first starting point, is it's okay to have this conversation. And there's a safe space where you can come and be yourself. So I think for me, that's really, really important. That's evolved as people have got more comfortable that there is a space for them. So I think that's the first thing that's probably changed. It's also, in the initial time, you're probably trying to get more people to hear about it. Now we're trying to deepen the conversation. We're trying to help people, enhance their careers, learn from other people, get access to some of the training opportunities, because ERGs are a space where perhaps you might be more clued in. You might see the communication more than some of the other communications. Or perhaps you're seeing it in a way that when it gets sent out, you kind of say to yourself, as I'm also guilty of this. Well, maybe, the time has passed. I shouldn't be doing that. But if I now see it being promoted by the wisdom community and I see that that's part of a career, then, then it becomes a conversation for me. And it was interesting. I was reading something today and the person was talking about the key change we're seeing is really that, it's not abnormal to be in your 60s and in work or in your 50s and in work. It's normal. So I think this is what we are talking about. We are normalizing the conversation.
There must be a few 40 plus at LinkedIn. What's the global population of LinkedIn, and what percentage of the population employee base is over 40? And how many are involved now in the Wisdom ERG?
We are a group of 2,000 plus employees at the moment and growing. And then there are allies. A lot of what we do, we promote widely across the company because one of the things is, we're very conscious that we're not just talking to somebody who's in their 40s or their 50s or their 60s. We are also talking to people in their 20s and 30s because we want to make it okay to get older, to be older.
We're talking about, you shared some really interesting data about career echo chambers and the lack of this intergenerational communication between those younger folk and the older folk. So what's the ERG doing to try and address this?
Just to reiterate, the research from LinkedIn would show that 1 in 5 members of the Generation Z, which are, have spoken to somebody over the age of 50 at work in the last year. And equally on the other side, 44% of over 55s have actually avoided conversations with the younger generation.
Wow. So wait a second. 1 in 5 Gen Z
have spoken to somebody over the age of 50. And the other thing,
shocking.
It is shocking. The other thing,
terrifying, actually.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting is, so again, 17% of workers say they actually don't know how to approach colleagues of other age groups. Now, that is where an ERG community can come in, because one of the things we do, we call it Fast Friends or Fast Connects, where we bring people together for virtual conversations, virtual coffees, and you can come. We usually discuss a topic that could be around a skill you've learned recently, a thing you wish you'd done sooner, whatever it is. And we learn from each other.
And you can actually talk to somebody older for the first time in your life without a texting kind of relationship.
Yeah, we all communicate differently depending on our age groups. My stepsons are all on text and whatever. They avoid phone calls and they avoid in-person conversations if they can. Whereas I suppose I grew up in a world where, we didn't have access to as much technology, I suppose, in many ways.
And both sides of your stats are interesting, that the young aren't talking to the older, but also that the older seem quite reluctant to connect with the younger. That one surprises me perhaps even more.
I think that's more to do with how we live in the world we're in now too. And if you think about it, 30 years ago, we were probably living in communities where our grandparents were, so there was an older community mixed in with younger community.
And now we're much more siloed and compartmentalized.
Exactly. And so I think people have lost that interconnection in society generally. And work is an extension of society when you think about it. And so what ERG communities can do is just, first of all, enable those conversations happen. The second thing is to share stories of people of different age groups being successful, and have events and activities which encourage people to participate. And those could be things, around mental health, for example, which go across all age groups, talking about how to prioritize, how to manage your time. Those things go across all age groups. Getting access to mentorship. I've had the benefit of reverse mentoring, and that's how I suppose I was able to enter a tech space at a much older age in life, because people who came from different backgrounds to me, who'd always been in tech, were willing to share information with me. Many of them, I would have to say now, given my age, were younger than me and are younger than me. But then I also share knowledge with them. So it's reciprocal. And, I think everybody, regardless of your age, you deserve a mentor. And that's one thing to think about. Careers don't stop because you become 40 or you reach another milestone birthday of 50 or 60.
I can easily understand, and that's a fantastic gift that you're serving as a platform for intergenerational conversation, exchange, mentoring, and reverse mentoring. What if we focus now a little bit on what are you discovering? And you have a great data source behind you, so I'm particularly interested. So what are some of the common concerns, aspirations of the 40 plus community that you're looking at? And are there any subdivisions then by decade, and does it evolve between the 40s, 50s, and 60s? I know you don't have any 70s yet, but perhaps they're going to emerge in the coming years.
I'm sure they will emerge in the coming years because in a 100-year life, I think the concept of age has shifted. But in many people's heads, our concept of age is still tied into fairy tales and perhaps our childhood and that, as to what it meant then. But the reality is work has changed. The skills you have today are not going to equip you for a job in the future. And all of us are evolving with that. So you're learning as you go. So I think one of the unifying trends is basically that you learn, you keep learning. It doesn't stop. And if you think about, there's a Yale University professor, Becca Levy's study, which talked about the positive effects of aging. And that, if you have more positive self-perception of age as well, you're going to live longer. So if you feel better about being older, then by definition, you're probably going to live even longer as well. You can extend your life. So you asked me, what do we share and what's different as you go? I suppose that's one. Your career doesn't stop. We're all interested in opportunity and opportunities to learn. I think one thing that's interesting is probably your concept of success probably alters a little bit with your decades. So, life ebbs and flows, and your career within that ebbs and flows. There are times when you're raising a family and perhaps you've less time for your career. And then there are other times where you are perhaps caring for somebody, and that has a consequence for what you choose to do in your career or not do. And so I think it is about the squiggly career now.
Well, I'm curious if in the sort of over 50 crowd, which is often a little bit post children, are you seeing evidence of people, newly liberated from that phase of life and, exploding or exploring into new areas? Is this a big demand, or is this just a sub-segmentation?
I think it depends. So certainly we're also seeing people have children older.
Yep.
So there are people
all over, yeah.
who have pretty young teenagers. And so still having those challenges. There are others who have, people at college and people then who have adult children or no children. I think that the thing is to enable the sharing of knowledge and the focus of that. I think the one thing that's probably different as well is that to some extent, we're all used now to some extent to people having conversations about their children and so on. We're not so used to people having conversations about perhaps caring for somebody in their family or friends or whatever. And we're probably slightly uncomfortable with some of those conversations and the consequence of that and so on, because we are ourselves imagining ourselves there. But that has a huge consequence for, I suppose, how much control you have of how much time you have for different things. But squiggly careers, I suppose, one of the things that does change as you get older, perhaps you're less focused on the top, if you like. You are more, and the research shows that we get happier as we get older. I think some of that is just you grow into your own skin. And that's certainly true. It's not that you suddenly become somebody you weren't before. It's not as if you change from being an introvert to an extrovert, but you do just get used to
To
who you
accept whatever you came out as.
Yeah, and I think you also realize perhaps that it's not about the accumulation of titles anymore. It's about, do I love doing that? Do I enjoy it? Do I want to get up every morning and do that? And so therefore, yes, there's a lot of younger people too who are really focused on enjoying what they do and really want jobs that do that as well. But I think one of the things is really that focus on promotion, next steps, and so on. It probably lessens as you get a bit older, largely because you lean into who you are, what you enjoy more of. And I think that's a key differentiation in terms of that. But, I think consequence of age in terms of, people's ability and cognitive ability is also true. We know that there are differences in that as you age. Older people generally are, we acquire more skills, probably because we've done it a bit more in terms of solving conflicts. We've had more rows maybe, so we can solve things and have those difficult conversations. The first time you do it, of course, it's a major trauma, but you get used to doing it over time. And so some of those skills really talk to why intergenerational working is so important and why a diverse team matters. So if you're thinking about from a hiring perspective as a hiring manager, and many of us are hiring managers as well, when you look at that hiring slate, are you seeing people of different ages in the hiring slate? We've got used to looking at it and seeing, okay, is there a gender?
There's usually a really big bump of people in their 20s on most hiring slates. So let's talk about hiring, because that's another point of discussion we had, is that too many older people tend to rely on their pride in their decades of experience and deep knowledge of something. And you're often suggesting that they reframe that conversation around a rather different concept. Can you explain that a bit?
So we're in a skills-based world. And as hiring managers, we're all looking for the best talent we can find. So the best talent means people with the best skills who are going to make the most impact on your team. And I think one of the things we talk about a lot as older people perhaps is I've 20 years experience, or I've 30 years experience doing that, or 40, or whatever it is.
I can do this with my eyes closed, kind of.
Basically. But I think it's more about the skills you have acquired, the level of those skills, the mastery of those skills, what it has enabled you to do, the impact you've driven, and the deliverables you've driven as a result. And that's less about whether you've 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. What you've been able to do has probably come from having all those years behind you. But the center of the conversation is around, I'm an expert. I can deliver this. And those skills conversations are really, really important. Having the examples that demonstrate that.
It also avoids you getting a really ageist reaction from somebody younger than you. When you say, I have 20 years experience, they might say, well, that's a lot longer than I'd like to hire.
Sure. But if you look at the OECD research with the mid-careers, they talk about hiring managers being less open to hiring people. And yet when they have hired people, they're very happy with the performance of older workers. So I think one of the things that we should all be doing is challenging ourselves about the why. We want the best a team can be, and the best a team can be is a composition of a range of cognitive skills. That comes from a range of different age groups, that comes from different genders, different ethnicities, different origins. It comes from having people who have, neurodiverse thinking, who just bring different perspectives to you. So
also challenging ourselves on how we present ourselves beyond a kind of pretty default natural tendency to stress our pride in our experience and years on these topics.
It does. And I think sometimes we are our own worst enemies. And if I think back, so I joined LinkedIn at, early 50s. And, I'm now...
An unusual story. Let's get a little bit about your story and background, because it's not so common to suddenly get hired into tech at 52. So tell us, that was a pretty big career change. How did you do it? Why did you do it? What happened?
So I think the first thing is over my career, I've had a number of different opportunities. And so I've always been someone who loves learning. So that's the first thing. And that hasn't changed. But this role came up in LinkedIn. And at the time, somebody sent it to me. And I looked at it and, I had my internal ageism voice going, saying, no, this wouldn't be for you. They'd never look at you. You shouldn't do this. And then I spoke to a mentor and she said to me, why? Why aren't you applying? And I think, that really landed with me at the time because I was like, well, why aren't I? And I looked again and read it again. And, she kind of said to me, but you have all of these skills. What's holding you back?
So what was holding you back? Because you'd had some rougher experiences early on that already got you on kind of age-related judgments.
Yeah. So in my 40s, I was made redundant at one point and spent quite a while out of work.
Because of your age, do you think? I mean, was that an age-related decision at the time?
So I think the length of time I was out of work was probably accentuated by that, yes. There was an economic downturn, so absolutely there were a lot of people out of work. I wasn't alone.
Yeah.
But certainly, when you're coming up to a year and a half and you're still... So by then I was doing things like doing part-time lecturing when I could, and I was doing volunteering, and I was whatever I could find to keep my brain going and so on. But, I think when you experience that yourself, it really brings home to you, that you really need to pitch yourself, that you need to have self-belief. And a mentor at the time actually said to me, he became a mentor subsequently, but I was interviewed by him. And I was interviewed and then I got called back and I thought, this is great. And in the meantime, I had started doing volunteering for somebody and I was just going out every day and doing something. And he actually said to me afterwards, the difference between the two places was huge. And so that really brought home the importance of self-belief, the importance of confidence in yourself. Because if you don't believe in you, nobody else is going to. And that's not age-related. That is, yes, it became accentuated. And yes, I probably took age and added it in and said, and it's because I am 45 or 44 and this is happening to me.
That's the narrative in our own heads. And I think a lot of people would go down that.
Yes, and I think that's something. And so, that just by definition, you don't see lots of yourself out there, I suppose, doing these wonderful, exciting jobs. And so what I would say is, for me, having had that experience and then subsequent to that, I was in another role and there were also redundancies coming but I happened to have made connections and talked to people in advance and I got a role almost immediately. But I think once you've experienced it a couple of times or once even, you kind of say, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'll get up, I'll do something else. Redundancy was a catalyst to rethink who I was, what I wanted to do. And I think it gives you resilience. So that's the one thing I would say.
More power to LinkedIn for hiring you at 52. That was a pretty open-minded policy that I hope they're continuing en masse.
I think certainly I see more people who are, 40 plus than I did when I started over nearly 8 years ago, And I think looking back, I think we all need people in our lives who, if you like, just mentor you, are your fans, are in your boardroom, give you those kind of moments where they actually cause you to put a lens up to yourself, a mirror up to yourself, and really lean into what you can do. Because you have this inner negative voice in your head all the time saying, well, that won't happen for me, or, I won't be able to do that. But I think you just start thinking about, okay, for me now, it's about what do I enjoy doing? And also, hopefully, about supporting other people and having an impact and creating impact. So actually, I get a lot of people reach out and chat to me about being in their 40s or their 50s or indeed older. And some of the challenges around getting a role or looking at different types of roles if they're in an organization and being considered for that.
No, I think you have the perfect personal background to be helping other people through what is often a very tricky and turbulent midlife transition chapter. So I'd like to zoom out now from your personal story to advice for companies more generally on managing Q3 talent. You've had now a few years of this wisdom ERG. What do you feel are the common misconceptions that companies have about older employees? And what would be your idea of how companies can shift to better engage, retain, and, as you were, recruit older talent?
I think the first thing is, remember, the perceptions of age are more to do with society than individual companies, because people are a product of their environment. So, this is much wider than any one company. This is about all of us together uniting and really doing something there. We're in a world where, you do a double take when you get a birthday card. You look at it and you say, oh my God, is that what they really think? So in terms of companies, I think the first thing is, if you look at the OECD research, it really echoes the fact that older workers are more loyal. The productivity doesn't differ. So that's the first thing, some of those misconceptions that exist. The other piece is, there's some stereotypes certainly around that older workers are less able to adapt to new technologies, new skills. The evidence doesn't bear that out. We're as able to learn as anyone else. There's lots of examples of older people going back to college at different ages and getting a PhD at 85 or 90 or other ages. So, managers acknowledge that when they have older workers in their team, they are successful. So for me, I think, if you think of what David Bowie said, that lovely saying about aging is the extraordinary process by which you become the person you've always been. And if you think about that, then it's about creating spaces where you can have the conversation openly across different age groups. Do you have an employee resource group? Do you have one that favors age? Do you encourage cross-sharing, virtual coffees, physical coffees, whatever? Look at your hiring slate in the same way. So we now say, okay, do we have a span of genders? Do you equally say, do you have a span of age groups in there? Because it is about different cognitive abilities that people from different age groups bring to your organization. And ensure training programs are open to all and communicated widely. If you have an employee resource group, they can communicate those training opportunities. In LinkedIn, we're very lucky. We have a range of training initiatives. So depending on your cultural background, there's additional supports there for that, because we know that people who come from certain types of communities have more challenges to face. But on top of that, age compounds those challenges. And so enabling the communication about those opportunities in all the spaces where those people are is really, really important. And recognizing people from different age groups. So if you're going to, shout out about somebody or give awards out, are you being age inclusive? Are you only recognizing people from a particular age group or a particular ethnicity or a particular gender? And if your answer is, well, I could do better here, all of us are still learning and there's lots more to do.
That sounds like a very good set of guidelines that I think our listeners will be very interested in. So think about intergenerational, create pathways and career management for people of all ages and stages, and communicate widely about developmental opportunities for people at every stage and make sure they're included in them. I think that's absolutely key and still, sadly, a rather rare occurrence. So the number of age ERGs is still just starting. So kudos to LinkedIn for having been one of the first movers. And thanks so much for all your leadership in this space, Deirdre. I think how I end these podcasts is by always asking my guests if they would summarize their own 4 quarters with a word, a phrase, or a metaphor. So you want to give a stab at your young age of how you see these quarters?
So for me, I think grow, learn, share, impact, and try again.
I like it. I like it.
I put a 5th word in there.
Because you might have a 5th quarter,
I hope so.
They're on their way, say some of the scientists. So you're already forecasting that next technological advance that many in the tech industry are predicting. So Deirdre, thank you so much both for your leadership and your time, your insights, and to many more happy years of sharing wisdom.
Thank you very much.
For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.